Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about Flutter and how you can use it for making cross-platform apps. And in this particular video, I'm going to show you how you can build a mobile app that will be a simple marketplace for beers. We are going to have few screens. The first one will be the listing with the search option, and we will have the beer details with an option to add it to the list of favorites. And at the end we are going to have the favorites list screen and the option to remove it from that list. So you can enter something in the input field and the results will be filtered. I already have my environment configured for the Flutter development, but if you don't have it, you can go to the Flutter web page and search for Get Started, and there you will find instructions how to set up your environment. I will run Flutter create command, which will generate a boilerplate project, and I will switch direction to the folder, and then I will open Visual Studio Code. Now I can open a simulator, which will be an iPhone 14 device. It may take a while it's loading, and now I can run Flutter run, which will open the template app in the simulator, and let's wait a couple of seconds. And the app is started. So we have this counter with the plus button, so we can increase the number, and we can also check how it looks in the code. You have the main Dart file. I can change the settings and increase the font size. So in this file you have the main function that will run when you start the app, and it will call runApp method with the root widget, which will be my app. My app widget will return the material app widget, which is in charge for specifying configuration properties such as title, theme, or home, which is going to be the initial screen. If you scroll down below, you will see the my homepage widget, which is a stateful widget. There is a method to update the state, and also a bunch of other widgets that are commonly used in Flutter apps. So all of these things are going to be replaced by our code. And in order to do that, I will create a new folder called Screens. And inside the Screens folder, I will create the folder called Home, which is going to contain everything that is related to the home screen. And I will create the home screen Dart file, where I will create home screen widget, and it will be a stateful widget. I will change the name to home screen. And I will need to import a material package. Let's make this widget return something meaningful. So I will replace container with the Scaffold widget. The Scaffold widget is a container widget which helps us structuring our layout, and it also provides us with some other widgets such as AppBar, body, bottom navigation, so we can use it as a container of the screen. So we are going to create the AppBar widget with the title property, which is going to be the text widget, and the text will be "I love beer." We can also add a comma after the text widget so we can structure our code better. And in the main widget, we can replace the home widget with the newly created home screen widget. And we need to add const in front of it. Basically, you will need to add the const keyword every time there is no property which is going to be changed. And the reason for that is because you will increase the performance, because you will make those kind of widgets be created at a compile time and not at the runtime. Now I will also add the body widget, which is going to be the text widget with the string "Welcome to the Flutter tutorial," and you will see this text on the screen. And the next one is the BottomNavigationBar widget, which will appear at the bottom of the screen, and it has items property, which will be a list of BottomNavigationBar item widgets that will be like individual items in the navigation bar. It will have the icon property, which will be a mandatory property, and I will pass icon widget, and I will use home icon from the material icons, and I will need to add const in front of the list. We can add a comma after the icon widget and it will appear in the new line, so it is more clear. And we can also add a label, which is going to be the text home. And now I will add another bottom navigation bar item, which is going to lead us to the favorite screen. I will use favorite icon from the icons, and the label will be favorites. You can see how it looks on the screen, and you will see that the home item is active, and we can change that by passing current index property to the bottom navigation bar. So that will specify which item is activated. So if we change it to 1, the favorites will be activated. Let's actually implement this functionality. So basically, on every click on the bottom item, I will switch to another screen. And first, I will need to create a variable that will contain the list of widgets. It will be called pages. I will use underscore in front of the variable name because it will be the private variable. So this list should contain 2 screens, or actually 2 widgets. First one will be the home screen widget, and the second one will be the favorites screen widget. But for now, we are just going to use text for the simplicity reasons. But later we are going to replace it with correct widgets. And I will also create a variable selected index, which will be 0 by default, which means that the home screen widget, or beer's list in this case, will be displayed. I will pass that variable to the current index property. I will use onTap event listener. And I will pass on item tapped callback function, which I'm going to create. So this function will be the type of void, and it will receive the index argument, which will be an integer, and we need to update selected index to the index that is provided by the argument. And the important thing is that we need to call setState, which will tell the widget that the state is changed and the widget needs to be updated, and also the whole widget tree. Now let's change what is displayed for the body. Instead of the text widget, I will use pages and access the right widget with the selected index. So now when I switch between favorites and the home widget, the text will be changed in the body. But later we are going to replace it with the correct widgets. Now let's focus on the beers list widget. I will first create the components folder inside of the home module. This is a place where I want to put a beers list widget. So I will create a new file. It will be called beerslist.dart, and I want to create a stateful widget with the name beerslist, and I would also need to import material package. So we have the template for the widget, and the next part will be to fetch data from the server and display it in this widget. And since I'm going to use HTTP requests most probably on many different widgets, I'm going to create a service for that, and it will be called HTTP service. So it will basically encapsulate HTTP functionality for fetching data. I will create a class HTTP service, and it will have a static variable called base URL, which will be equal to the URL that we are going to use for the backend API calls. I will search for the Punk API, which has a lot of different endpoints about the beers. So you have some short documentation about the API. Here is the root endpoint, and you have some rate limits, but we are going to search for get beers endpoint, which we are going to use on the beers list widget. So this is the response that will be returned from the server, and we are probably going to use name, image URL, we'll see later, but let's copy this URL. I will just copy the base part, and then I will create another variable that will hold the value of getBeers URL. Now that we have this URL, I will create a separate method where I will call it with the HTTP request. It is going to be an asynchronous function, so it will return the future, which is similar to promise in JavaScript. It represents an asynchronous action which is going to be completed. And once it's completed, it will return the list of beers. So I will create a new class called beer. So it will have a property called ID, which is going to be an integer, then name, which is going to be string. And for now, this is enough. Then I will create a constructor and make these fields required. By setting the const in the constructor, we are telling Dart that this is an immutable object. And now I can pass it as a generic. The name of the method will be fetchBears, and it's important to add async keyword. And now we can write the method logic. But before that, we are going to need the HTTP package. I will open the terminal and run Flutter pub add HTTP command, which will download the latest version of HTTP package and add it to the pubspec YAML file. You can open this pubspec YAML file and check the dependencies. So it's here. Now we can use the package in our HTTP service. So let's see if the Visual Studio Code is going to import it. No. Okay, so I will just import it manually. I will write import package http/http.dart and I will add an alias http. So now I can use HTTP package and I will call get method, which will receive the URI object, which I'm going to create with the parse method, and I will pass the get bears URL, and I will add a wait keyword in front of it because it's an asynchronous function, and I will store it in the variable called response, which is going to be read-only. So this is the reason why I have final in front of it. Now I will check the status code of the response, and if it's 200, everything is good, but if it's not 200, then I will throw an exception with a message failed to load bears data. Now let's cover the happy path. Basically, the value that will be inside the response body will be the JSON string. So I need to convert it back to the list type. And I will use convert package, and I will add it with the command flutter pub add convert. Now I can use JSON. I can import it, and I will use decode method and pass the response body. So this method will return the list of dynamic values because it can be any object stored in the JSON string. And I will call this variable body. Now I would like to iterate through the body and convert each item into the bear object. So I will pass the callback function. It will have the argument item, and then I will need to create a named constructor in the bear class, which is going to create a new bear object from the dynamic value that is provided. I will call it from JSON, and it will receive the item that will be a map of string and dynamic value. The argument name will be JSON, and the ID property will be equal to the ID in the JSON, and the name property of the bear will be equal to the name property of the JSON. So now let's use this method. I will call it in the map callback function. And since we use a map function, we need to convert it back to the list. So in this way, we are going to receive the list of beers. And I can store it in the variable called beers. In the next line, I will just return this variable, and the function is completed. Now, if you have many data models, you might want to create a separate folder for them. So I will do it just for an example. I will create a models folder, and I will copy and paste the beer class there. Now I can just import it and it will work fine. And I will press R and hot reload our app. Now let's go back to the beers list widget and try to display the beers there. And I will create an instance of the HTTP service. I will also create a variable called beers, which is going to be the type future, because it is asynchronous operation. It won't have any value. I will initialize its value in the init state method. So here I will set the value of beers to the response that we get from fetch beers method. And we are telling Flutter to start fetching data when the widget is created. Now let's go inside the widget, and I will replace the container with the widget called Future Builder. It will have the builder function that will take two arguments. The first one will be the build context, and the second one will be async snapshot. So the build context is used for metadata about the state of the current widget, and we're not going to use it right now, but async snapshot is important because it will contain the state of the future that we want to use, which is in this case the beers variable. So we also need to provide that to the future builder. There is a future property, and we are going to pass the beers. So future builder widget is in charge for building the widgets based on the state of the future that is provided. Now in the builder function, we're going to check the snapshot, and we're going to check if hasData property is true. I will add another condition that will check if there is any error in the future. And in case of an error, I will just display the text with an error message. So if the future is completed and there is data, I will just display the text for now. And I will also need to add const. If none of these conditions are true, that would mean that the data is being loaded. And I will display a circular progress indicator in the center of the screen. One important thing to change is to go to the home screen and update the list of widget pages with the BeerList widget. And now I would need to hot reload the app, and now we have beer data, which means that our future returns beer's data. Now I would like to display this data on the screen. And I would like to display them in the grid layout. I will use GridView widget with the builder constructor because we have a dynamic data from the server. And in the grid delegate, we can specify the configuration of the grid. So I will use sliver grid delegate with fixed cross-axis count, which will help us to specify the fixed number of columns for this layout. It will be set to 2, and for the item builder, this will be a callback function that will be executed for each item in the list. And the first argument is build context, which we are not going to use, and the second one is index, which we are going to use to access the current item. And we want to return a new widget for the single beer. We can use card widget. And for the card widget, we have child property, which is going to be column widget because we want to have a few widgets one below another. And it will have children list of those widgets. The first one will be text with the beer name. And now in order to access the beer name, we are going to use snapshot, then we are going to access data, and inside that list, we are going to pass the index, and then we are going to write name property. Oh, and for now, we are only going to have this text widget. Let's see how it works. I will hot reload the app, and now we have the list of beers. And we have an exception error. It is the range error, which means that we are trying to access the item in the list, which doesn't exist. So I'm not sure what is the cause of that, but we will check it later. Maybe we can just hot restart the app. And now we also want to add other fields of the beer. One of them will be image, but first we are going to go to the models and update the beer class. So I will add a new field, image URL, which is going to be the string. We can also check the response from the server. We can also add a description. And we can also add alcohol by volume, which is going to be double. And now we can update the constructor. And we can also update from JSON constructor. But now we are going to be careful with the JSON field names. we have image underscore URL, and the rest of the fields have the same name. Now we can go back to the beers list and update the card. I will hot reload the app before that, and here it is. Inside of the children of the column widget, I will add image network widget. And the first parameter is URL of the image. And let's hot reload the app. And we have an exception which says that null is not a subtype of type string. It is probably something that comes from JSON constructor. So let's go to the beer model. And I don't see any issue with this constructor. Maybe we can just start the debugging and see what we get. I added a breakpoint on line 28 to see what is inside of the snapshot. So let's wait a couple of seconds for Xcode to build the app. So it says that the data object is null. If we continue with the process, we will have the error that type int is not a subtype of type double. So I guess we can fix it by converting the JSON ABV value to double, and I hope it will work. And I think we could also change the type of ABV to integer to int, and it will also work fine. But let's just continue with this approach. Let's reload the app again. And now we have images in the list, but they are bigger than the space that is reserved for them. So we need to make some adjustments. In the beers list widget, we can wrap the image with the expand widget. That will limit the size of the image only to the area that is inside of the card. It has a child property, and it will be image network widget. Now let's reload the app. And it works fine. Now the image is within the size of the card, which looks pretty nice. We can also add some padding to the card, which will prevent the content to touch the border of the card. And we can add padding property, which is going to be edge insets all. And it will set the padding to all sides of the widget to 10 pixels. We can also add margin to the text, which will create a space between the image and the text. So I will use container widget and pass the text as a child widget. and I will have the margin property, which I will set to edge insets only, and I will set top to 20 pixels. We can also add text align to the text properties and make it centered. And we can reload our app, and now it looks much cleaner. We can also apply some additional styles. I will create a style property, and it will be text style widget, and the font size will be set to, let's say, 18 pixels. You can play around with the values and add some additional styles. Okay, so let's try to fix this issue. I think the cause of this issue is that we didn't provide the number of items inside of the GridView widget. So we're going to do that, but we can also add some additional properties. So I will set shrink-wrap property that will tell the grid to take only the space that is needed for the list. And I will set primary to false, which will tell the grid that this will not be the primarily scrollable widget on the screen. Now we can provide the item count, which will be the number of items that this grid is going to have. And if we reload the screen, I think the error will be gone. Yeah, everything works fine. Now it's time to tackle the search input field, and with that I would like to restructure our code a little bit. So you remember on the home screen we have this underscore pages list, and it is used by the BottomNavigationBar. So we want to replace this peers list with the new search list. So the search list should be a widget that will contain both search input widget and the peers list. So I will also create search input widget, which is going to be a stateful widget. I will import material package, and I will create search list widget, which will be a statelessWidget. I will also import material package, and now we can edit the widget content. It will be column, because I'm going to have two widgets, one below another. And the column widget has children property, which is going to be a list of widgets. I will add const in front of it. And it will contain peers list. And above peers list, there will be search input. Now let's go to the search input widget and replace container with TextField widget. We can decorate the TextField widget with the decoration property. We can provide InputDecoration class, and it will have various properties. One of them is hint text, which is like a placeholder in HTML. So I will display search text. And I will need to add const in front of the text field. And let's reload our app. We need to go to the home screen and replace the first item in the pages. So it will be SearchList widget. I will need to import this widget. And we should also remove the beers list. So now let's reload the app. And we have both input and the beers list, but there's also a yellow-black stripe block below, which means that there is an overflow in the size of the widget. So some of the widgets exceed the available space that is reserved. In this particular case, the TextField widget pushes the beers list down, which creates an overflow, and it can be easily fixed by using a SizedBox widget. So I will go to the beers list widget and wrap the whole widget with the SizedBox. And I will also need to wrap it with parentheses at the end. So with the SizedBox widget, we want to specify the fixed height of this widget. And in order to calculate that, we're going to need the media query class to get the size of the screen. So I will call media query and then the off method, and I will pass the context as an argument. And I want to return the size property. Now for the height of the SizedBox, I will just pass the height from the size. And everything still works the same because the SizedBox will take the height of the screen. But what we need to do is that we need to subtract the screen height for the height of the text field. And let's say it is 400 pixels. So you will see that the height of the beers list is subtracted. So we just need to check what is the height of the text field widget. So I will just try with guessing, but you can also open the widget inspector with debugging tool and see what is the height of the widget. So let's try with 300 pixels. It's close to the bottom. Let's try with 270. Okay, let's leave it to 270. And now when we scroll down to the bottom, everything works fine. So now we can continue with styling of our search input widget. So we want to have a rounded input field, text field. So I would like to create a container that will wrap the text field, and the container will have styles for the rounded area. So it will have a child, which is going to be the text field, and I will pass decoration and BoxDecoration class. So I can specify color, which is going to be something grayish. And the border radius will be set to circular to 50 pixels. We can then add some styles to the text field. So enabled border will be set to none, and focused border will be also set to none. which is going to hide the border for this text field when it's enabled or focused. Let's reload the app, and it looks fine, but now it blends with the background, so we can change it by going to the main widget, and we can add a color for the scaffold background. I will use the property scaffold background color and pass the black color, but I will only use it to trigger a color picker. So on the left side you will see a small square, and when you click on it you will be able to pick the color that you want, and then the color will use from ARGB method. So let's pick something that is bluish. So this is just me playing a designer role, so you have all the freedom to change everything and choose whatever color you prefer. So we need to add const in front of the color. And let's go back to the search input widget. We can add some margins to create a space between the search input and the rest of the layout. But we can make the color more whitish, so it looks better. And in the container I will add margin and use edge in sets, which is going to be set to 10 pixels. And now we have this yellow black stripes block again, but we will fix it later. We can also add a padding, so we can create a space between the hint text and the border of the text field. So I will use edge insets and apply the padding only horizontally. I would also need to add const. Now let's try typing something just to feel how it works. Okay, let's go to the beers list widget. Now we can just adjust the height of the SizedBox because we changed the height of the text field by adding margins. Now it works fine. Now we can also make the grid view aligned with the text field, and we can add a horizontal padding to the grid view. And it will take 10 pixels. I forgot to add const in front of the edge insets. And let's reload the app. We can also change the height and make the whole beers list touch the bottom navigation. I would say the layout is pretty clean right now. Now it's time to work on the search input widget and to filter the beers data. So every time user enters something, we want to filter the data, and if the user changes the screen to favorites, and then if he goes back, the search term should remain in the text field and the data should be filtered. So we want to have some sort of the state management in our app. And in order to implement that, I will create a separate class, which will be named data storage, and it will be in charge for keeping the data that is commonly used by different widgets. This class will extend ChangeNotifier class because we need to use notify listeners method, which will trigger rebuilding of the widgets that are using some portion of the state that is declared here. We are going to have the variable search term. I marked with the underscore because it will be the private variable. And then we are going to have a method to set the value of this variable. So it will be a void that will update search term to the new term. And here we want to call notify listeners. So every widget that listens to the value of the search term will be updated and rebuilt. We can also add another method to get the value of the search term. So it will be just a getter for the search term value. Now let's go to the search input widget and start using our data storage class. So I'm going to wrap the text field with the consumer widget, which will listen to changes inside of the data storage object. So the consumer will have the builder callback function, which is going to have 3 arguments. The first one will be context, then the data storage itself, and the child, which is going to be the child widget. So this function is responsible for creating the child widget, and it will return text field. And we need to import consumer widget. I will need to import the provider package. So I will run Flutter pub add provider. So it will add that package to the pub-spec file. So now we can import this widget, and Visual Studio Code doesn't offer me an option for that, so I will do it manually. So I will import package provider / provider.dart. Now the text field will have onChanged callback function, which will be triggered every time the value of the search field is changed. So it will have the value argument. And now we are going to use data storage and set search term method with the new value field. And we have an error which says invalid constant value. Okay, the type of the value is good. Maybe we can change the value name to text. Maybe it's a reserved keyword. Oh, we actually don't need the const keyword in front of the text field widget. So it will work fine, I think. Yeah, and we need to add the const in front of the input decoration. So everything is fine now. So the search input widget will perform mutation on the searched term, but we also need this value in the beers list widget, because there we're going to filter the data based on the search term. We can use again the consumer widget, and the consumer widget will wrap the grid view. So it will be a consumer of data storage, and it will have a build callback function with arguments consumer context, data storage, and child. And now I will just move the whole grid view into the consumer. I will need to import the provider package. And I can also add a comma at the end of the arguments to structure the code better. Now, before rendering the grid view, we have the access to the beers data, and we have also the search term. So this is a good place to perform the filtering. So first I will store the beers data in the variable called beers data, and that will be the data field in the snapshot. And next I will create another variable, which is filtered beers data. So I will use beers data, then I will call where method, which will filter the data based on the condition that we use in the callback function. So it will iterate through the list and check if there is a match between the search term and the beer. So I will check if the beer name contains the search term, and I will use the lowercase method to provide case insensitivity for the search. And at the end I will need to convert the data back to list. So let's replace the snapshot data with the filtered beers data. And let's reload the app. We are going to have the issue which says that could not find the correct provider. So we're going to need the widget on the root level, which is going to be ChangeNotifier provider widget. So we need to wrap our app with this widget, which will allow other widgets to listen to changes inside of the data storage. Inside of the main function, I will wrap the My App widget with ChangeNotifier provider, and for the create callback function, I will return data storage, and there is also a property called child, which is going to be my app. So let's hot reload our app. So the issue is still here. Everything seems to be fine. Let's maybe try to hot restart the app. And it seems that the issue is solved. Okay, we can continue. Now we can test it how it works. If you type something like Buzz, you will only see the first beer in the list. So it seems to be working correctly. So I noticed that somewhere along the way we lost some properties for InputDecoration. We had enabled border and focused border set to none. So I will return these changes. Not sure what happened to them. Let's hot reload the app and see if the border is gone. You might notice that if you type something and go to favorites and go back to the home screen, the beers list will be filtered, but the text field will be empty. So we need to create a controlled text field widget. So I will create a text editing controller and store it in the variable controller. Now in the init state method, I will set the initial value of the controller based on the value of the search term in the data storage. And I will get the data storage instance by using provider_of method. And I will pass context and set listen to false, which will tell the widget that it shouldn't be rebuilt every time the search term value changes. I will also pass data storage as a generic and get only the search term. We can also remove this comment. And now we need to set the controller property of the text field. And let's hot reload the app and see if we fixed the issue. So now if we type something, we go to the favorites. If we go back, the search term will stay the same. And the filtering is still working as well. So now it's time to create another widget and another screen. And I will create a details widget. And I will add it inside of the screens module. So the name will be details screen. And it should be loaded when the item on the beers list is clicked or tapped. And let's create a stateful widget with the name details screen. And for now, this widget will just return the text widget with the content beer details. And now I will go back to the beers list widget. And here I will search for the card. And I would like to wrap the card widget with the GestureDetector widget, because I want to listen on the tap event. And every time when the user tap on the specific card, I will open the details screen. So the whole card content will be passed as a child property, and above it I will add on tap property, where we should write what should happen when the user clicks on the card. So on tap will be a function that will call a push method from the navigator class, and it will navigate to the new screen. So the first argument will be the context, and the next one will be material page route. And material page route will create a new page with the builder property, which will set the function to return the details screen widget. And let's hot reload the app, and we need to add a semicolon at the end of the function, and after that it should be fine, I think. Yeah, it's super ugly, but it works. So let's continue with our work on the detail screen. So first, when the user taps on the card widget, I would like to pass the ID of the selected beer. So that will help us to identify what beer was clicked, and we can fetch more detailed data. Let's format this code a little bit. Now inside of the detail screen widget, I will declare the ID variable, which will be the final, in order to provide immutability of the variable. And I will pass it to the constructor, and I will mark it as required. Now inside of the HTTP service, I would like to add a method that will fetch the detailed data about the single beer, and I will use this endpoint. So down below I will create another asynchronous function. So I will need to add future, and it will return a single beer, and it will be called fetch single beer, and it will have a beer ID as an argument, which will be an integer. You can maybe scroll up a little bit and use the previous function as a reference. So we have the variable called response, and I will use HTTP package and get method, and I will pass the URL. And I will also use string interpolation to add the beer ID. So in the next line, I will check if the response status is 200, which would mean that everything works fine on the server side. And otherwise, I will throw an exception with an error message. We can write something generic, like failed to load single beer data. And here, as in the previous method, I will store in the variable called body decoded JSON string, and I will use JSON decode method, and I will pass response body. And then I will use map function to convert the JSON into the beer object by using from_JSON method. And E would stand for element, but you can just use whatever you want. And it will return a list of beers, because this endpoint will return an array and not a single element. And if you open the browser, you can actually see the response from this endpoint. So you will see an array. So yeah, ideally it should be the single beer should be returned, but yeah, we can just check the length of array, and if the length is equal to 1, then it means that we provided the correct beer ID. And in that case, we can just return the first item in array, which should be the only item as well. Otherwise, we can also throw an exception error. So, as you prefer. You can also wrap those two exceptions into one exception. It doesn't that matter. So, we will continue with the details screen, because there we want to use this HTTP service method. So let's hot reload the app. And there is an error. Okay, now it should work fine. Maybe I can just hot restart the app. And it works fine. So now in the details screen widget, I will create an instance of the HTTP service. So I will create a variable, which will be a final of the type HTTP service, and the name will be _HTTP service, because it's going to be a private variable. And then I will also create a variable called beer details. So it will be late initialized variable of the type future, because it will return a result of the asynchronous call to the server. And then inside of the init state method, I will call HTTP service fetch single beer method, and the result of that will be stored in the variable called beer details. I will need to provide the ID that is provided to this widget when the user clicks on the card. Now we are ready to replace the widget content, and I will change the text to be the scaffold, which is a default layout widget. And it will have the body property, which is going to be the future builder widget. And it will come with the builder method, which will be a callback function that will have two parameters. The first one will be build context, and the second one will be a snapshot. And it will be an async snapshot, and it will represent the state of the future value beer details. So if the snapshot has data property, that will mean that the feature is completed successfully, and in that case we can return the beer details. In other case, we can check if the snapshot has error. So we can display some error message. And in case none of these are true, we can just display the circular progress indicator widget, which is going to be a loader in the center of the screen. And I forgot to add a semicolon at the end of the center widget. And if I hot reload the app, something is wrong. Let me check it. Okay, we forgot to add a future property to the future builder, which is very important because the future builder will listen to the changes in the state of the beer details value. And based on that changes, it should return the right widget. So let me hot reload the app again. And we have beer details at the very top left of the screen. So let's actually display the correct beer details data. Now instead of the text widget, we would like to display the correct widget. And I would like also to have the custom AppBar. And in order to achieve that, I will use CustomScrollView widget. And for the scrolling behavior or the scrolling physics, I will use bouncing scroll physics, which is typically seen on the iOS devices. And always scrollable will make the widget be scrolled even when its content doesn't overflow. The next property will be slivers, which will be a list of widgets that will be a portion of the content that is scrollable. And the first item in the slivers list will be a custom widget for the AppBar. So I will create the components folder, and inside I will create details AppBar file. And now I will create a stateless widget called details AppBar. So instead of returning the container widget, I will replace it with the SliverAppBar. And I will need to pass some properties. So we can add a background color and set it to white. Then we can add a stretch property, which will allow the widget to grow and stretch when the user is scrolling the app. The next property will be flexible space, and I will pass the flexible space bar widget because we want to use a custom background for the app bar. I will use image network widget, and I will create image URL, which is going to be a property that is going to be passed to this details AppBar widget. And at the end I will have a fit property, which is going to be box fit cover, because I want to keep the ratio of the image and also want to make the image stretch over the area of the AppBar. I created the image URL final variable and it will be used in the details AppBar constructor. Now let's go back to the details screen, and under the slivers list of widgets, I'm going to pass our new AppBar, and I will need to provide the image URL property, which is going to be a property from the beer details. So we have an error, and let's check what it is. Okay, we have a correct build context, then the snapshot, and it says that a value of type null cannot be assigned to a parameter of type string in const constructor. Okay, I think we have a const keyword used somewhere where it shouldn't be used. Yeah, we have a const in front of the CustomScrollView, and we can remove it and we can add it to the bouncing scroll physics. And now it works. Now let's add a height to the AppBar, and it will be expanded by default. So the height of the expanded bar will be set in the expanded height property, and I will set it to 300. Now let's style the AppBar a little bit. So we have the background property, and instead of the image network widget, I will use container in order to add some paddings and margins. So I will pass the image as a child property. And then I will set the margin with the edge insets only class, and I will pass top property, which is going to be 40 pixels. Now we move the content a little bit. We can increase the margin and it looks better. And I can also wrap the image into the padding widget. And I will add a symmetric padding, which is going to be on top and on the bottom, and I will set vertical property to 30. We can use also the center widget and pass the image as a child property, which is going to place the image at the center of the AppBar. So now it looks much better. Now I will create the next widget, which is going to be called details info, and here I will display all the detailed information about the beer. It will be a stateless widget with the name details info. And I can also import the material package. So let's start with the details info widget. So I will replace the container with the SliverList widget, which is a widget for displaying a list of items in the CustomScrollView. And it has a property called delegate, which should be a widget responsible for creating the list of widgets. So I will use SliverChildDelegate, and I will pass an array, and the first item will be a card. And the card will have a child property. And I will pass a column widget because I want to have one information down below another. And the first item will be the text with the beer title, but I need to create the beer variable, which is going to be passed to this widget as a property. So I will access the name of the beer. And the second one will be also the text widget, but I will pass the description of the beer. And I have an error. Oh, I know what's the issue. So first I need to replace SliverChildDelegate with SliverChildListDelegate, because we will have a list of widgets. For now we have only card, but later we will add another one. And we also need to add the beer to the details info constructor. So every time when we use this widget, the beer will be required to be passed. And now let's go to the details screen. And below the details app bar, I will add details info. And I will pass the snapshot data as a beer property. So now if I hot reload the app, the details should be displayed on the screen. And at the end of the card widget, we can add a comma to format the code. And now we can add margins and paddings to the card widget. The card widget has a margin property, and I will pass edge insets all class, and the value will be 10 pixels, so it will apply the margins on every side. Let's hot reload the app. And for the column, I will wrap it in the padding widget, and I will pass it as a child property. So now for the padding value, I will use again edge insets, and I will set it to 15 pixels. Or 16. And in the SliverChildListDelegate widget, we want to add a button which will allow user to add the beer to the list of favorites beers. So this is the ending line of the card, and here I will use elevated button because I want to have this effect on with the shadow. So I will have two properties, but I would like to use the icon widget because I want to use the icon that represents the favorites button. So the icon will be there is a favorite icon, and I will add const in front of the icon widget. And then the label of the button will be the text widget with the content add to favorites. And we need to add onPressed method. And for now I will just leave it as an empty function. So now we have the button, but I would like to make a distance between the button and the border of the screen. So I will add a margin on both horizontal sides, and I will set it to 10 pixels. I will pass the button as a child property of the container, and it looks aligned. So by default, the AppBar should have go back button, which should be an arrow button, but for some reason it's not displayed, and I will assume that it is something that is related to the theme, because when I click on this bottom top left corner, I got redirected to the home screen. So let's go to the main Dart file, and in the material app widget we have primary swatch, and I will set it to light blue, and the color theme will be changed. The background will be a slightly lighter blue color, but the textual content will be black. So now the arrow button will be visible. We want to store somewhere the list of the favorite beers, and I will go to the data storage, which will be the place where we implement that logic. So first, I will create a list of beer variable, and I will call it favorite beers, and it will be an empty list. I will import the beer model, and I will create a getter method for this private variable, which will just return the favorite beers. We can also make it unmodifiable, because we don't want to have any changes when it's provided to the other widgets. A challenge that we are facing here is that we want to preserve the favorite list even when the user closes the app. So every time the user opens it again, the favorites list will still contain data that were stored. So I won't be able to achieve this by keeping the data in the local state. My solution will be to keep the data in the file. So I will create an asynchronous function called fetchFavoriteBeers, and the first variable will be file, where I will obviously store the file that I want to use. I will get that file from the getter method called _localFile, which I'm going to declare above. And it will also be an asynchronous function. The method will return future value of type file, and it will be named local file. It will be asynchronous function, and now I will need to import library called Dart.io. And now I will use a special method to get the directory path for the documents that are stored for this app, and it will be called getApplicationDocuments directory, and we don't have it auto suggested because I need to import the package. And before all, I will need to add it as a dependency to the package manager by running the command flutter pub add path provider. And this package is quite useful if you want to use directories of the app or of the user system. So yeah, it will help us in this case. Now we can import the library. And the value that we get from this method will be stored in the variable called directory. And at the end of the method, I will return a file class with an argument of a path to this file that we want to use for the data storage of the favorites list. So the path will be the path from directory, and then the file name will be favorites, and it will be a JSON file. So the file class provides methods and properties to interact with the files, so you can read, write, or check if the file exists. And when we call this function fetch favorite beers, the first thing that we want to do is to check if the file exists. And I will call exists method, and I will put exclamation mark at the beginning and await, because it will be asynchronous function. So if the file does not exist, I would like to create a file. And I will use another asynchronous function, which will be create. So I could also wrap the code in the try to catch block, just in case something fails, so we will be notified about that. And I will throw an exception in the catch block. So let's tackle the case when the file does exist. In that case, we want to read the file content, and I will use read as string method, which will return the content of the file in the string type, and I will store the value in the variable called file content, but I will also need to add await in front of the method call. Now I would like to convert the file content in JSON format, and I will use JSON file content variable, which will be a list of dynamic values, and I will use the file content above, and I will use JSON library and decode method, and I will pass file content, and then the string value will be converted into the JSON format. Now I would like to convert the JSON into the list of beer data, and I will store it in the beers variable, and I will use JSON file content and map function to iterate over the list. And for every item that will be in the list, I will use beer class and from JSON method, which will convert the dynamic item into the beer. And at the end, I will convert everything to list. And now I can set the favorite beers to the list, to the beers variable. And I will call notify listeners, which will update the subscribed widgets to this data storage. Let's create the else block and copy everything below into the else block. And I think this code will work fine. The next method that we are going to need is to add a beer to the list of favorites beers, and it will return the future of type void, and I will name it add beer to favorites, and it will have a beer parameter which will be named new favorite beer, and it will also be asynchronous function, so I will put async keyword. And as in the previous method, I will also get the local file and I will store it in the file variable. And I will also check if the file exists, and I will also wrap the code in try and catch block. And you can improve this part of the code by reusing these lines that are the same, but for the simplicity reason I will just continue with this approach. So I will throw an exception. And now I will use the favorite beers list, and I will add a new beer. And then I will notify listeners. And at the end I will update our JSON file with the new beers list. So I will use the method write as string, and then I will convert favorite beers with the JSON encode. I will convert it to the JSON. So now that we have these two methods, we can actually try it out in the widgets. So I will go to let's first hot reload the app, and everything seems to work fine. Let's go to the details info widget, and down below where we have the elevated button, I would like to use consumer widget, which will react on the changes in the data storage by using ChangeNotifier. So I will say that this consumer will use data storage, and we have a builder method which will be in charge for returning the right widget based on the state of the data storage. So it will have 3 arguments. The first one will be consumer context. The second one will be the value of the object that we listen to. I will call it data storage. And the last one is a child, which is an optional parameter. So I will use this elevated button widget as a return value of the builder function. So now I would like to check if the current beer that is selected is added to the list of favorites, because if it's already added, we want to change the label of the button and also to make it be disabled. So now I will have access to the favorites list. So I will first create a variable called beer is added to favorites, and it will be a boolean value. And I will use data storage, then favorite beers, and then I will search for the method. I'm looking for the first where or null method, which will help us to find an element based on the condition, but also to handle null cases, because it might be that the beer is not added to the list of favorites. And I will need to add a package for this method, which is called collection. So I will run flutter pub add collection command, and that will add this package to our registry. And let's wait a bit. And we will need to import it at the top of this file. Now there will be a callback function for each beer in the list of favorite beers. and I will call the argument favorite beer. And now I want to check if the favorite beer ID is equal to the beer ID, which is the selected beer. So if this condition is false, then the method will return null. So I will need to check if this value is not null. So that would mean that the beer is already added to the list of favorite beers. So let's try to format this method a little bit. So Visual Studio Code doesn't allow me to put everything in one line, but okay, it doesn't matter. So let's go to the elevated button, and now for the label, I would like to have a conditional operator. So I will check if the beers is added to the favorites, and then if that is true, I will display added to favorites. Otherwise, I will display add to favorites. And for the onPressed, in case the beer is added, I will just return null. And in other case, I will call add beer to favorites method from the beer storage, and I will pass the beer object. And the beer is an object that we get from the constructor variable. Now let's hot reload the app. And we don't see any changes we made. Okay, we will need to hot restart the app because we added a new package. Let's see if this changed something. So if I press the button, I still get the error. Okay, let's actually kill the app and see if it solves the issue. I will run Flutter again, and it will take a while, but let's see. The app is built, and let's go to the beer, and when I click on the favorites button, it will become disabled because the beer becomes part of the favorites list. So it works. But if you check the terminal, we have an exception which says that converting object to an encodable object failed. Instance of beer. So let's try to solve it by adding as string at the end of encode method. And let's hot restart the app to see if it helped. I still get the same exception. In order to solve this issue, we are going to need to implement toJSON method inside of the beer class, because that will make the beer object encodable into JSON format, and that will really solve the issue that we have. So I will open the beer.dart file, and below the fromJSON method I will create another one that will return a map of string values, of string keys and dynamic values, and it will be called toJSON, and it will be used to map the beer's property into JSON keys. Now let's hot restart the app, and I will open the beer. I will add it to the favorites, and the error is gone. And when I open the beer details again, the button will remain disabled. And if I open another one, then it will be enabled. And I can also open the favorite screen, which I'm going to build right now. So I will create the favorites folder, and inside that I will create a file called favorites_screen. And now I will create a stateful widget with the name favorites screen. I will also import material package. And now in the widget I will replace the container with the consumer, because we are going to use the data storage and the favorites list that is stored there. So it will have a builder function with 3 arguments. Let's first import the provider package, and the first argument will be consumer context. The next one will be data storage, and the third one will be child. Now I will store the favorite beers in the variable called favorite beers. It will be a list of beers that is get from the data storage. We need to import the beer model. And now we can check if the favorite beers list is not empty. And if this condition is true, I will return a textual widget with a content beers list. In other case, I will also return a text widget, but with a different text. I can also make it be at the center of the screen, and it will say that the list of favorite beers is empty. Let's add a comma to format this a little bit. And in order to see our changes, we would need to go to the home screen widget. And here in the list of widgets, I will replace the text widget with the favorites screen. Now let's go back to the favorite screen widget, and I will replace the text widget with the list view widget. And I will use the builder function. And the thing that is really good with this widget is that it will render only the list items that are visible on the screen, and it will improve performance because the rest will be hidden. So it will have the item builder property. And for every list item, I would like to use card widget. And for the child property, I would use list tile widget, which is quite often used when you have a leading icon text and a trailing icon. So the title of the list tile will be the text widget, and I will pass the name of the favorite beer item. And let's hot reload the app. And we get an error which says that invalid value, only valid value is... Okay, it's a range error. Okay, so we need to add item count property. And it will be a length of the favorite beers list. And now it works fine. Now we can also add a leading icon for this list tile. So there is a property called leading, and I will use circle avatar, which will make the image be like a circle basically, and it has a background image property, and I will use network image widget, and I will pass the image URL of the favorite beer item. So now let's hot reload the app, and the image is there. And for the trailing image, which will appear at the end of the list tile, I would like to add an option to delete and remove this beer item from the list of favorite beers. So I will use icon button widget, and I will pass the icon with the name. And I would also need to pass onPressed callback function, which is going to be an empty function for now. And I would also like to add some distance between the list view and the edge of the screen. So I will wrap everything in the container. And I will pass the whole consumer widget into the child property of the container. And I will set the margin with the edge insets widget. And I will set to have 10 pixels on all sides. Yeah, so it matches the previous home screen and it looks aligned. So let's implement onTap functionality for this list tile, and I will use navigator class with the push method, and then I will use material page route, which will provide us with the builder function, and then we will use it to navigate to another screen, which is going to be the beer details. So this function should return details screen, and I will set the ID to be the ID of the favorite beer item. Let's add a comma to format this structure. Let's add it here as well, and after this one it should be fine, I think. Yeah. Okay, so let's test it out. I will reload the app, and when I click on the list tile, the details screen will be loaded. The remove icon button still doesn't work, but yeah, let's first add a couple of beers before we start removing them. And now when we open the favorites list, we have 3 of them. So let's implement removing the beer. Now let's switch to the data storage. And below add beer to favorites, I will create another method that will return a future value of void. It will be named remove beer from favorites, and it will have beer ID as an argument. So it will be asynchronous function. And I will create a try and catch block. And in case of an error, I will return the exception. So in the try block, let's first get a local file and store it in the variable. I can actually copy this whole code block. And now, since I have the beer ID, I would like to go through the list of favorite beers and exclude it from that list. So basically I will return a new list and store it in the variable called newList. And I will use var method. And in the callback function, I will implement the condition. So the condition will be to return every beer that is not the provided beer ID in the argument. And I will convert it back to list. Now let's set the favorite beers to the new list. And after that, I will notify listeners to update the widgets. And then I will update the JSON file. So I will use the existing line. So this write as a string will be a solution for that. And I will just replace. No, I don't have to replace anything. Everything will work fine. So let's hot reload the app. And now if I click on the trash button, nothing happens. Let's hot restart it. Okay, the favorite beers is empty. I will add something. Now we have 2 items. And if I try to remove it, I don't see anything. Yeah, of course, because we didn't implement onPressed callback function. So inside of the onPressed method, I will use data storage and remove beer from favorites method, and I will pass the beer ID of the favorite beer item. And let's hot reload the app, and it works fine. So let's go back to the home screen. We can add a new beer and another one and the third one. And I have all of them here. I will remove them all. But we have one small issue. If we add a couple of beers and then we decide to restart the app, if we open the favorites screen, the list will be empty. And the reason for this issue is because we didn't call fetch favorite beers when the favorite screen was initialized. So in the init state method, we can use data storage and call the fetch favorite beers. So I will use provider of, and I will pass data storage, which will be a type of provider that we want to use. And I will set listen to false because this function will be called only once when the widget is initialized. And I will call fetch favorite beers. Yeah, so this should fix the issue. So let's hot restart the app. And now when I go to the favorites, I have the list of favorite beers there. And the issue is solved. We can test the full functionality once again with the search bar. So I will type Berlin and then this beer appears. And I can open the beer details, add it to favorites. I can also add a couple more beers. and all of them are now in the favorite list. Let's add another one. And the favorites button is disabled. If we hot restart the app, the list is still there, and we can remove a couple of them. And if we restart the app again, and if we go to the favorite screen, we only have 2 beers left. And I think you owe me a beer after this tutorial. But yeah, you don't have to buy me one, but if you want to support me, you can subscribe to my channel and share this video. And if you feel like you want to share anything, please feel free to write in the comment section below. Enjoy your day and cheers!